Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm speaking with Paddy Ryan. Paddy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you on. We're going to be talking all things rowing. You're a rowing coach, and we're not breaking novel ground here. We've spoken to rowers on the Sports Psych Show. We've spoken to Olympic gold medalists, but I don't think we've spoken to a rowing coach. So really looking forward to unpacking that world, the ins and outs. Before we do so, Paddy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, born Patrick Ryan, but when I moved to the UK in 2000, I guess the English friends I made nicknamed me Paddy, and I have been Paddy for close to 25 years now. So that's where Paddy comes from, because no Australian ever is going to call me Paddy. And Americans make it sound like something in beef burger. So we'll stick with Paddy in England and Patrick everywhere else. I've been rowing since I was 17 years old, disturbingly about to turn 51, and have been at Cambridge University since 2013, and been in charge of the women at Cambridge University Boat Club since 2021. So yeah, been doing this rowing thing for longer than any athlete I've coached and who's been alive these days, which is disturbing. And I'm now as old as some of their parents, which changes constantly changes the relationship with them, which is one of the things that I find entertaining and scary. Yeah, I live on a small farm with my wife and 2 dogs, which she's turned into the family business. And yeah, we've got a nice little lifestyle. And, at some point in there, my hobby turned into my job, and we're so far doing all right for a little boy from Adelaide, Australia.
So you're the rowing coach at Cambridge University. You're from Adelaide, Australia. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Adelaide, Australia, from a sporting perspective. You only started rowing at 17. That feels quite late, mate.
Well, rowing's one of those unusual sports where actually people do start quite late in life. For example, one of the strongest medal chances at the Paris Olympics is in the rowing world is Imogen Grant. And she learned to row as a 19-year-old when she came to Cambridge University. So,
wow.
And as Helen Glover is another one,
Yep.
thing. Usually, but you've got a strong sporting background in other sports, and you've crossed over into rowing. Australians renowned for being a very sporty country. I may be 6'8", but I was pretty rubbish at most sports. And then I found rowing, and it's like a hand fitting inside a nice glove. It just fit.
Yep.
And I went from my last year of high school, where, even at high school level, you'd still do about 8 to 10 sessions a week. And literally the next year I was doing 14, 15 sessions a week. And I did that as I think I went to university later in life because I was trying to see how far I could take the rowing. I think there before I sort of had my first sort of change in how I was going to think. So I was 21 years old. I think I was doing 20 sessions a week, something like that. My poor mother and the food bill is all I'll say. So I went from there. I had a little break from the sport in my sort of mid-20s. So I started university at 23.
How far did you get in the sport, Patrick?
So Australia was, it was, in the time I was doing sport, it was in a very different world. There was the start of funding and stuff. So I never quite made it into that funding pattern. So the part-time job is essentially what kept me going. But I went to university because the rowing was kind of on a back burner, and I wasn't sure, a bit lost. So I became a teacher. And then at the end of my teaching qualification, I moved to the UK. I wasn't intending to stay, but I did this thing called Henley Royal Regatta, and suddenly found this passion for the sport again, and met some incredible people, and then off we go. And I basically haven't stopped. I rowed for another 3 years. Then one way or another, I ended up coaching. I was asked to take a lead in the coaching role, and then I quite enjoyed that. And then I lost my father, and so I was like, well, let's give this a crack. And my wife and I are believers in following your passion, and we were we're lucky enough to have had the funds to be able to follow that through the sort of the tougher times and support one another through that. So, a lot of things have been very lucky that we could pursue that. And then I worked for 8 years for a London-based sports charity called London Youth Rowing, which is all about trying to get inner city London kids onto the water and pursue that pathway. And a passion for our sport as much as the stuff around it. It's about there's a lot of skills that rowing and sport in general, but rowing gives you that. Looking back, I can go, wow, I would not have been here without rowing. I was a much better student once I picked up rowing. So unfortunately, I was 17 when I picked it up. So a lot of catching up on there. Yeah, so I did the sports charity stuff till 2013, and then was lucky enough to get this job as my wife and I decided to relocate to Cambridge and outside of the sort of the London challenge, the busyness of London. Wouldn't say I'm less busy, but we have a less busy lifestyle. So yeah, and I've been in Cambridge since, as I said, 2013 till today.
So you took up the role of rowing coach for the Cambridge University women's rowing team. Is that a full-time role?
Yeah, so in 2013, well, it was actually probably about 2012, 2013, it was announced that the women's boat race would be joining the men in 2015 across the championship course.
Yes.
And at that point, suddenly there was equal funding. So the men's coach and assistant coach roles have been full-time for several decades. And then the women were joining in 2015. And there was our funding part. Well, our primary sponsor at the time, Newton Investments, invested in making sure we could have enough money to actually invest in the infrastructure and things like that. So we were able to have a full-time coaching role and an assistant coaching role, which I was in 2013. And we had another assistant coach for things. So there was a team of 3 across the, for the full project, which is more than 1/8. And then, to prepare us for that first race in 2015, which, Oxford kicked our ass. Wow. And on the women's side, I've been doing it longer than anyone else. On the men's side, well, there's plenty of them that have been doing longer than me. So, so I was what would be class. So, Oxford and Cambridge have a name to their second boat. So Oxford's second boat is called Osiris, and our second boat is called Blondie, after the band. And so I was the Blondie coach until 2021. And so, as I said, we got thoroughly beaten in 2015, but in 2016 we won. So 2015 is the only race I've ever lost in the boat race as an individual coach, and running the program. Blondie lost. They lost this year, which is the first time since that 2015 race.
If I take you back to 2015, that first time, so it's the second boat, Blondie, you were head coaching there. You took over the first boat in 2021, is my understanding. But you were head coach of Blondie. 2015, you lost.
That would be the assistant coach, because you're always working for the head coach, and the head coach.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
The head coach runs that blue boat, which is the one you see on TV.
The head coach runs the blue boat. You're the assistant coach, and so you're running Blondie. And so, when you reflect back 2015, was that you lost? So was that a big learning experience? I mean, if you were to compare your coaching approach in 2015 versus 2016, did much change as a consequence of the result?
I think so. I'd come from an environment where, and recruiting has never been, and I'll explain what I mean by recruiting, because our idea of recruiting is very different to anyone else's. But essentially, where we'd gone out, actively sought experienced rowers to bring them into the fold and stuff, it has never been something that was in my world. You just didn't do it because it was about developing the athletes you had and stuff. And hindsight, probably could have done a little bit more of it. The national team pathways, all of that stuff's not really about recruiting, because it's like you develop the athletes you've got and you try and support them. The boat race is just such a different thing. So in 2015, absolutely, I learned a lot about actually what was entitled in this race. But we came up against. Oxford was stacked. They had one of the most successful female rowers in history, 2 Olympic gold and an Olympic silver medal, and Karen Davies, who was stroking the Oxford boat. And we essentially had a lot of athletes who had come through college, the Cambridge colleges. So the fields weren't stacked heavily against us. But even that is just like understanding what's the new minimum standard. How hard do you have to push from day one? What culture do you want to create? That culture has to be based around. It's like, yes, and we'll talk a bit about, I'm sure, about care and what I did this year. But underpinning that is a lot of like, yeah, okay, but we need to be here, and currently we're here, and if you don't make those sort of targets explicit, then you're never going to get there. So the recruiting side of things was a massive learning curve in terms of how to attract athletes to our program. Now, there's always rumors about, oh, well, they bring in, it's like, we do not offer any athlete any financial gains from coming and joining us. Any financial support they have to earn through academic means, and that's through the university or through the department. And there's always rumors around that we can or can't. It's like, we do not. That budget I was mentioning earlier, it's a lot smaller these days from corporate sponsorship these days. But on the rowing bucket list, or the things that people want to achieve, is like, more people watch the boat race than any rowing sporting event in the world, wow, including the Olympics.
Okay.
We had 2.5 million people tune in for the boat race this year, or 2.7 million, something like that. And then I think it ends up with streaming and something like 6 million people. That's more than the Olympics will get.
6 million around the world, and you've got several 100,000 lining the Thames, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's like, there's nothing quite like that experience of, you walk outside the boat bays and there's thousands of people cheering for you, and it's quite surreal, to be honest.
And Paddy, this is probably remiss of me to actually set the scene appropriately, because there's going to be, I would imagine everybody listening in has heard of the boat race being Oxford versus Cambridge. And obviously, as you've already kind of mentioned, that was just, I believe, the men's race for many, many years, and this parity now. But how old is, am I right in thinking it's about 160 years old, at least the men's race?
It's the men's race is approaching almost 200, but the women's race is approaching 100. It hasn't been raced 100 times because there's large gaps through in those early days. And same in the men's race, there's like 200 years, but there's only 178 of the races.
Gotcha. Various wars got in the way as well, I would imagine.
Well, actually, it's mainly just in those early days, just, things like, we're going back to the 18th and the 19th century. So, horse and cart were getting boats and down here and there and stuff.
The horse broke down.
Yeah. The race is older than the number of races that's been done on both the men's and women's side. And, the women's race has totally changed, probably more so than the men's race, because they've been on that stretch in Putney for most of those 200 years.
Wow. Okay. And so it's one of the world's oldest sporting events.
It is the oldest collegiate event.
It is the oldest collegiate event. And to set the scene for everybody listening, because we have a global audience here, that it is a day. It's a proper day in the British sporting calendar. As you said, millions of people watch it on TV. So yeah, there's an emotive element to it, and it's you're brought up with the habit of watching it, so it's a big deal. Coming back to the specifics of what you've been saying to me, I believe what I've heard you say is that recruiting has become a bigger deal for you, and perhaps that sounds quite unusual in the world of rowing. And something interesting that you said was this idea of, when you first started there, Oxford were very, very strong. But one thing I kind of loved, at least my interpretation of what you said, was that, well, that's all very well and all very nice, but ultimately we've got to set the benchmarks. We've got to look at the data, and we've got who we've got, but we've got to stretch them to strive to reach where Oxford were at that time. So there was a kind of a feeling of taking responsibility as a coach and not just laying excuse or blame at the corner
Yeah.
of, well, Oxford are so good, we've got no chance of beating them. Well, what have we got to do here in order to set the scene for our athletes to actually compete with Oxford? That's the kind of thing I'm hearing from you from the early days of your coaching there.
Yeah. I mean, so there was understanding what the sort of the minimum standards were going to be, and then adopting a. I probably didn't appreciate this as much because it wasn't so much my job. It was Rob Baker is who I first worked for. He was in charge of the women for those first few years, and he's now in charge of the men. And
Yes.
So learning a lot from the way he conducted the program, and really opened my eyes to the other factors that around a historical match race. It is us versus them. There is like at no point in my job description does it say I have to go and race any other university or do anything else. It's like my job is to win that race. And we do all the other stuff, but we do all the other stuff to actually create an environment and an attractive proposition so that other people go, oh, aren't they competitive? I want to go continue to improve my rowing at that program. So there's no point in us isolating ourselves and going, aren't we great over here? But no one actually knows how good we are compared to anyone else, or how bad we are compared to anyone else, if we don't actually go think. Otherwise we just become this surreal, this sort of non-entity isolated from everyone else. And next year is going to be pretty exciting, as happens sort of post-Olympics every year. We have Olympians come in, and Oxford will be the same. It's on the women's side. But 10 years ago, women didn't believe that it was an option. Like, I would go visit schools in the United States, talk to at events and stuff, and they're like, but is it really going to happen? Are we really going to be on the same course? Are we really going to get the same coverage as the men? And well, we're 10 races down now, so we're still, I think the women's side of the race is still evolving, still developing at a much bigger pace, but women's place in the world is still growing. And by that mean it's like, we talk about equality and stuff, and I'm very lucky I'm an institution where the equipment is the same. It's like we have to negotiate around access to stuff at times because we can't all fit in the same place at the same time, but it feels very equal in terms on that side of things. But we've still got generations of how women see themselves, how the women are treated consciously and unconsciously, that we still need to talk about. And and that's probably, well, that leads to where I am today in terms of where our culture is, and or where I try and steer our culture to encourage our student athletes and student leaders to drive, because I'm a 50-year-old male. What the hell do I know? So that's watching those things from Rob and learning about that space and really exploring, and then meeting Kath and all of these things and stuff. Skills is one thing, but if you don't have the culture to embrace the skills and the challenges and the take the risks, you don't have much.
You've mentioned Kath there, and for everybody listening, that's Kath Bishop, who's been on the podcast before to talk about her book, The Long Win, and I know she's been a big influence on your setting of your culture. Let's do a deeper dive into that culture, and you've also mentioned there learning from Rob, who's now the head coach of the men's team. And I don't want to ignore the fact that you've quite rightly said, I mean, we're two guys here. I'm a fraction younger than you, but not much. Talking about women's sport, women's rowing, and as you've said, I'm guessing that it's a learning experience for you, and you've had to create a culture and an environment where it's been quite player driven or person centered, in order for you to learn, in order for you to help your people set the culture, I'm guessing. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about you've alluded to some things already, but tell me about your culture. Maybe start from 2021, because you took over with the first boat, the blue boat. So tell me a little bit about how you set that culture? How did that come about? What does that look like? If I was to step in to your daily practices, what would I experience? What would the walls tell me if they were listening in?
Yeah, so I think the way we run things is that we have. So historically, the race has been like each team is run by a student president, and that student president in the olden days used to then go and have to find coaches, and it might be a 2 week placement here or thing, and then those coaches would be brought in and do things. And now we're in this world of professionalism and stuff. So, we are a student-run club. We have every member of the executive is an alumnus, and more than half of them have held leadership roles within the club while they were students at their time as well. So I think that history is really important to nurture and to look after. So in 21, a young woman named Bronya Sykes, who was still an undergrad, going into her final year, was elected as the next year's president. And I sat down with her and I said, "Look, we've got 3 Olympians coming in next year. 2 of those Olympians are, well, one was Imogen Grant, who was who'd raced the races before COVID and then gone off and done the Olympic stuff and was coming back to finish her medical degree. And the other one was a woman called Grace Prendergast, who at that time had just won a gold and a silver at Tokyo Olympics, and I think at that time she held 3 world records in 3 different boat classes. And then Ruby Chu. So you've got these undergrads, and then you've got people at the pinnacle of our sport. Okay, how are we going to make sure that we're all aiming for the same thing? And the way to do that is through a bought-in culture. It's like, so how are we going to talk to each other? How are we going to operate in terms of in those conversations that we need to have, the tough conversations we need to have to continue to move the project forward? How are you going to be confident to challenge me when I'm overstepping? Because I will. The nature of what I'm doing is I'm trying to push you to go faster. Like at times I might get carried away, but having that culture of fairness and of understanding that the underlying principle is that I care so much about you going as fast as possible and doing the right and not, injury is part of sport. It sends shivers up my spine at the prospect of hurting someone with an injury that, they may never get over. So, how are we going to behave to each other? How are we going to behave around our equipment? How are we going to support one another to achieve new heights? So there's the sort of 3 questions. And then I go, what I would like to see from you is a series of workshops, because I guess it came about by, when I was working for Rob Baker back in sort of 2014, 15, 16, around there, we were lucky enough to work with a sports psychologist by the name of Kate Hayes. Kate Hayes these days, back then she was leading on the sports psych across multiple Olympic sports. She's now the sports psychologist for the Lionesses. So she's very qualified. And I guess that's some of the things that she sort of taught us. It's like culture is everyone. It's not something you can impose on people. It's an interesting segue is like I was talking to a group of high school kids and I said, so what is culture to you? And they said, religion. It's like, well, interesting. Some of the values in religion are exactly what, are the underpinnings of a nice culture, but it's not a religion. And so through a series of workshops led by the students, they put down words and things like how we're going to talk to each other, and those sort of pillars that underpin what does care look like, what does we used to use the word respect, and then I just felt that respect has been done to death, and I felt actually the care is respect is it feels to me a lot more like you have to respect me because of my position, and I just think it's been bastardized to the point where it has no value, well, it has very little value anymore, even though it's still there. But care for me was a much more powerful word that actually underpinned how female athletes. It's been a long time since I coached men, so I will use the thing. But as a male watching females, that's how I feel. It's like they're more likely, or they buy into really caring for one another. And when you create an environment where it's like, okay, your jobs, we want this space to be where you're like, hey, that was an excellent lift. Oh, well done on that erg. Really, good technical model there. Loved how you embraced that change. They really, so they come to practice, especially when, what I love is listening to when they're in the gym, doing lifting weights and stuff. It's like, it's one of my joys is to sit upstairs back away, making sure that I'm, checking in on athletes and stuff like that, but hearing the fun and the laughter that's happening down in the gym. So I think that, that's the I create a circle. I create a sort of some things like, okay, this is the space where I want us to direct towards, like, and then I want to empower you. You go create what's right for you, and then you tell me these are the parameters with which we want to operate. I might push a little bit on some of those and go, okay, well, because we do tend to wander towards looking after one another can bring us towards the lower common denominator rather than the high common denominator, because of that sort of element of participation versus performance. And that's a really tough one for some people to embrace. And, right or wrong, we are working towards performance, not participation. So we do sadly have to upset people, and we do have to say, no, I'm sorry, your time with us is done. But having a culture means that is delivered with care and respect and done in a way where they feel like, well, I've given it my best shot. And that's actually, don't hold my hand up, don't always get it right, but that's what I aspire towards. The skills of learning, the rowing. So, it is a closed sport. It is, I would argue, one of the toughest closed sports around, because it's like, the more people you add, the more chances there is of going wrong, and you go, the faster you go, there's less things going wrong, or less difference between each person. So, they're the skills that I think. But having a safe space where people can go, actually, I can do this differently to the way I was taught, rather than being a right or wrong. All of those, creating that space to allow people to do it. And even then, I still have conversations where, I think a friend of mine basically said, you got to say things 5 times to people before they hear you. And I was like, I still find that one very true. But I told you that. Oh yeah, no, Dan, you said it once. Damn it. So yeah, that's how I see culture created.
I want to check for my own understanding here. In simple terms, you've laid down 3 questions. How do we communicate? How do we behave? How do we deal with challenges? Those challenges could be tough conversations. Those challenges could be challenges to you as coaches, because you're there to push them. So 3 broad questions. You asked the students, some of whom are Olympic medalists. So when we say students, we're talking about world-class athletes here, as well as undergraduates who are exceptional and leaning towards world class. You're asking them to create workshops. And I just have a question here. So you've posed the questions as the coach, but then you've asked those students to go away and produce the workshops. You've done no work to produce those workshops out, and they've driven that, they've delivered that.
So I might steer them towards some books. I will steer them towards previous student leaders who've done the same workshops, so that they can answer some questions. And I missed a point, that we're working towards essentially a mission statement. So they'll start with these workshops in September, and they'll present a mission statement somewhere in February. So they constantly feel like they're working towards something. It's not something that's done in one session. It's something that's done in 4, 5, 6 sessions, and that it's there's really broad, big strokes. Anything's possible, and then it's up to those student leaders to bring. Okay, well, this word, this word, this word. Yeah, okay, well, we can shape that into things. So it might be that we sort of narrow it down into a series of 6 words. I've had everything from a poem. I've just a kind of a standard mission statement, but then the border might be surrounded by all of the words. So they can present it in any way they want. I think one year we presented as a sort of a Lego block, a block of Lego that was in the shape of a lion. It's the animal of the university, and each of those blocks had a word, and they would present those to. They would like, okay, and who's exhibited these things? So that's not my personal favorite thing, but as I said, it's how they choose to deliver and live this culture, because it's not. I heard a phrase the other day. It's like it's not a one and done. It's like you can't just say, yeah, we've done women's health workshop and now we're done. We can move on. It's the culture is the same thing. It's like it's something we constantly have to work at to finish with that final product.
You're referring to words, and you've given us one word of care, for example. Would you be willing to share some of the other words over the years that have been put up in lights? And also, therefore, I'm assuming that you're taking those words, or they're taking those words, and they're breaking them down into specific behaviours and specific circumstances whereby those words are going to be important.
Yeah. So resilience is one that constantly comes up.
Okay.
Courage, tenacity. I'm dealing with Cambridge students, some of who do English degrees. Some of those words get pretty big. Lots of adjectives. They all, yes. They're all about. Care is such a beautiful overarching word because you can stretch that in any direction you want. The same, in many ways, same as you can with respect. Honesty. You can think of an adjective and like a positive, constructive adjective, and you can add those things together. For me, it's not the end product. It's the process. It's the thinking about. Okay, we want a performance environment. We want to do it where we have had a positive experience working with each other while we are still competing against each other for those few seats that are available. And it's an environment of conflict, but we want to turn it to a positive pathway.
Kind of balancing competition and cooperation.
Yeah, exactly. And by having them involved and them create, they have to constantly think about how they manage that, how they work towards the end goal, how they accept different, people's different personalities, traits. There's so much difference. We have, thankfully, we have a diversity of cultures as well coming into the team, and so it's a pretty quiet sport, but it is slowly moving, thankfully, in that direction.
There's extroverts, there's introverts, there's people who are agreeable, there's people who are disagreeable, that type of thing. People who are highly conscientious and super data driven, and there's others who would prefer to just get in the boat and not look at a number ever. I'm guessing that's that typical team makeup, right?
Yeah, and creating an environment where we're lucky enough to have the technology where they can, everyone can look at the numbers, or they can put them, they can just close it away and stuff. And it's fascinating. So in a rowing stroke, we can put a computer in the boat, we can put a computer everywhere, and we've got some great cyclists on our team, and they would not go anywhere without their computer. But as soon as they get in a boat, they hide the computer. It entertains me greatly. So yeah, that's. I mean, I can't be specific because it's like culture is it's organic. It's working towards something with some fairly normalized principles, but it's not something. I've made the mistake of going, well, we've done it 1 year, and then it has a large number of people from that year who then go, oh, well, we did it last year, and this is our thing. And it's like, yes, but every year, 50% or more of that cohort changes and slowly gets diluted, and suddenly it's not there anymore. So it's like, actually, it needs to be reinvented and revisited every year. And
does it have to be reinvented or revisited or both?
I think it should be I think it should start with a clean slate. So
okay.
So you get everyone has their input. They're not, the same reason I can't do it. I can't give them it's like, this is your culture. It's like, well, that's my culture that I'm imposing on others.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's the process of going through it. If I just give them, it's like, okay, this is our starting point, and then you do a little bit, it's like you're still adding on to something that someone else created, rather than you being involved in something from scratch that gives you pride in what is achieved. And it's just as important, like those 6 sessions or workshops, that probably 15 or 20 workshops for the junior committee, but that's as important as the training sessions.
Do you ever get any pushback from the perspective of participants, competitors saying, well, Paddy, you're the expert, you're the coach, you're the solution finder, you should be solving problems? Because it sounds to me like you're placing the emphasis on them finding solutions, solving problems. Do you ever get any pushback there?
Not on the culture side of things, no. I will be, they're young people. Things do start to deviate away, and that's my job, is to sort of push them back and make sure that, from the junior committee side of things, is like, hey, hang on, stop. Let's make sure that we're pushing this. This is my reasonings why. So I've done 10 boat races and I've won 9. So I get a lot of trust purely on my record. I bring a lot of, how they treat each other, that sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, but I still write the program that they've got the training program, the skills acquisitions that make the boat race quite unique to other races. So there's a large, it's a culture underpins everything in how we talk to it, communicate, respect, attitude that we have on the water, how we deal with criticism, because my job is to be critical. But I'm, but I'm being the critic. I'm being the guide. I'm sitting in my office, doing admin, sure, but the door's always open if someone wants to come and have a one-to-one conversation. It's like, oh, I'm struggling with this. We spend a lot of time on welfare. People's mental health is incredibly important, and it's becoming, for one reason or another, these young people have. I hate to say that, not as resilient. I'm 50-year-old. What do I know? I don't have a metrics to say. It just feels like some of them haven't had the same sort of exposure to failure than other people have and stuff. So it's trying to create an environment where, like, they all know how hard I work, and they all respect. If they need anything, I will do everything I can to support that need, be it equipment, be it physio support, nutritional support, get them in to see the doctor faster. We're lucky enough to have access to those resources. So I'm underpinning a lot of the things that allow them to work as hard as they can.
You're a coach who wants your people to set the culture,
yeah,
and then you're facilitating that process. I'm interested to tap into how you go about your coaching. I remember reading once Sir Steve Redgrave, is it 5 times gold medalist, 5 Olympic Games, talking about rowing being a very technical sport. How do you go about your coaching? Are you facilitative in that, in your coaching approach? Are you a little bit more authoritative? How do you go about coaching?
Well, so I set out a model of what it is we're aiming for. So we have what we call the Cambridge style. I think the men's style and the women's style is probably a little bit different these days, but so we create a style objective. It's a bit like we had a guest coach once who described it brilliantly as like, it's still like, in his case, he used to use dancing. It's like, well, we can do the rumba, we can do the ballroom, we can do whatever, the cha-cha. I think, rowing, just basic skills are there, and it's, underpinning that. Like, so we're shaping and timing things to work towards our culture. When people refer to anything in sport, we're generic. Like, if we speak about sport generically, we're almost always referring to men. And most coaches are men. Most scientific research has been done on men. And I understand the reasons why that was, but that is a mental framework or that we need to challenge, and we need to have open conversations about, well, yes, are we? I heard it from a Kiwi presenter. I can't remember her name now, but it was like, women are not small men, but we constantly do treat them like small men because we know nothing else. So I guess I'm trying to create a culture where we can explore that. I had these crazy experiences like where I cared more about their bra health than they did because they wanted the smart looking sports bras. It's like, yeah, but there's no technology in those bras. No one's They've just slapped it together and given it a brand name. So I got in someone with expertise in that field. And it's like, so there's interesting conversations around there. There's female health to continue to explore and to try and get them to understand that through knowledge of their menstrual health, they are actually empowering themselves, not creating more things to worry about. So yeah, there are conversations to have that traditionally most men would find uncomfortable. And therefore avoid them, or they'll do them once and then never address it again. So I went out and bought. So we have 2 training venues, and so we did 3 with our travel as well. So we have these packs. It's like, well, this is just this in case you get caught short. There will always be something that you can use in case you get caught short, because women have periods, so they need to be like, it's like, yeah, okay, it's just normal. I'm just going to deal with it rather than thinking it's something that they should be worried about or stressed about. It's like, no, we're going to make sure that we reduce some of those things, because that's how we've made them feel about these things unconsciously. No one's done this maliciously, but it is the unintended consequences of how we've done things. So yeah, I could probably gone up for a bigger segue there.
No, so what I'm hearing you say, I mean, I would perceive what you're doing as a psychologist, as a sports psychologist here. You're actually building a sense of conscientiousness across a range of topic areas, and potentially helping the people in your culture understand that you're not trying to get them to overthink things, but you are trying to help them be mindful of the kind of factors that can influence their participation in the sport, their progression in the sport, and their capacity to perform in the sport. It sounds like you're a coach of conscientiousness, if I was to draw from personality science.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would argue that I'm a pretty conscientious human being. Sometimes to my own fault.
To your own fault, as in, why do you think? What are the drawbacks of being a coach who is highly conscientious? Do you feel?
I'm overly self-critical. I'm never, like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm never doing enough, and therefore I will think negative thoughts of myself when I feel like I could have done more here, or I could have done more there, and so what I do is never good enough, and that's some self-reflection, some learning that that is my journey, and I'm getting better at it. But yeah.
That's interesting. So a high sense of conscientiousness, you feel, could create some perfectionist tendencies, and could also lead you to overthink, overwork, and also turn up the volume of negative thoughts and unhelpful emotions.
Yeah, it's like perfectionism is not healthy because it leads to fear of failure. And I know that Cambridge students are really good at perfectionism. It's how they got there. They have worked their asses off, and so therefore they have really high expectations of themselves. But yeah.
And that's the interesting dynamic with personality traits, is that they both help and they hinder. So a sense of high achievement, to be industrious, which is a part of conscientiousness, is important because it helps drive you on. It helps you to have that achievement striving. But to your point, at too loud a volume, it can lead to tendencies towards perfectionism, and also other unhelpful thoughts, emotions, feelings as well.
Yeah, and I think that's that's one of the things. There's a bit of a sort of a segue, is that it was really healthy when we started having athletes that we had approached to come and do the race. It's like they had to get in all of those things. They have to get in on their own merits and stuff. Cambridge is a fairly attractive offer in terms of from an academic place, and you get to do this boat race and all of those sort of. I describe the boat race as the most awesome add-on to a pretty special experience. So, we have these athletes that so they come through an undergrad and they've worked so hard to get into Cambridge as undergrads and to prove themselves that they belong, etc., that they tend to think so. Having these Olympians, or even just people coming in from other universities who just see the world or have a different balance of rowing in where rowing fits in their lives, comes in. It's like some of them are just like, okay, well, Grace Prendergast is like one of the most humble human beings I've ever met in my life, and yet one of the most talented. And she's had her own journey and stuff like that. She's going through that post, like, who am I outside of rowing, all that sort of stuff these days. But she's an incredible human being and could have been a massive pain, but she just brought everyone together, and by just giving a different being someone who's like just modeling relaxed behavior, positive little snippets of like constructive feedback. I mean, of any athlete I've ever worked on, she's by far the one I've learnt more about, not just where I am in my technical journey and my sort of rowing coach journey, but actually just the power, the questioning of like, there is nothing that woman did when she came in and went like, oh, okay. So you can do things so differently and go incredibly fast. Because everything I had up until that point was about treating women as small men. And suddenly going, oh, actually, the difference between upper body and lower body is so different to women than it is to men and stuff. And rather than accepting some of those differences and going, okay, let's look at this, let's look at my sport with new eyes and go, okay, so let's do those things differently. And that comes really just by having a culture where it's not authoritarian, it's care, it's by creating an environment where they can speak to you. Like, I grow as a human being, I grow as a rowing coach, I grow as a inquisitive, I've encouraged this place of female physiology, and guess what? I've got 2 PhD physiologists. They're not doing anything related to like sports physiology, but they're inquisitive about it, and they go, Paddy, I just read this book. Yeah, have this. And I just don't think that in a lot of other sporting environments that happens. I just like, I'm lucky enough to work with Cambridge students who are inquisitive and things. So let's embrace that knowledge rather than I must be right.
It's interesting that you say that, Paddy, and very relevant for my world, because, and I'm sure for many sports psychologists' world, because I think that the message we are constantly trying to deliver is that we do want these terms are used too freely, but player driven or player centered environments, and for me, a coach is an expert, and to utilize your expertise as a coach is vitally important. But to retain a sense of curiosity and being inquisitive is absolutely vital. And I think in my own work, what I've learned over the years is that even though players, competitors, are not psychologists per se, they ultimately become the most powerful mediators and influencers of psychology. And so for me, sophisticated coaching taps into that, tunes into that, and finds, to speak to everything that you've spoken about on this podcast so far, creates a culture and a coaching practice and processes within that practice and that culture. It creates those processes in order to tap into that, whether you call it player driven or player centered, but empower the players to be able to drive things here. And it feels like, and this is going to be a very broad brush statement, but it feels like, because rowing tends to be entrenched within a college or university culture globally, and again, I appreciate it's a broad brush statement, but that students are ready to do quite a bit of the work when it comes to leading on workshops. But so much of my work is in the world of football, and I found if you can be brave as a coach or brave as a sports psychologist and really get the players talking, they've got a lot of great things to say, and they're in a great position to drive things. It's just about being brave enough to ask the right questions and get them talking and give them a platform to talk. No question, Paddy, but I think yes, rowing is in a unique position, but I think other sports can learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in a unique position. I think, well, we as Cambridge has been in a unique position because we've been winning for quite a while. When you win, it enables you to, some of that pressure starts to come off, and you can take the foot off the pedal, sure, and cruise. Well, we know where that's going to end up. It might not happen that year, but it's going to happen. Or you have the opportunity to go, all right, let's look at different ways that we can continue to advance. In my case, I'm looking at empowering young women to be the best versions of themselves and to ask questions about, okay, how can we do this for the how can we question the existing knowledge and go, is this the right thing? And I haven't got the answers to all of those things, but I have the privilege of working where I work, means that I can access some pretty intelligent human beings that also are inquisitive and stuff, and just like bring in the experts that go, well, yeah, I mean, I've got all of this data. So I work with Connie, who's one of the world leading experts in biomechanics in rowing. And so, she keeps all her data, and so it's like, but a lot of that data tends to be generic. It's like men and women. And so things like, well, actually, okay, what, now that we have all of this, actually, can we start to identify some key aspects that are more akin to making women go fast than just fast, and so just being asked to ask those questions. And I honestly, I don't believe I would have this freedom, because if I was losing regularly, then there'd just be this, these, I'm spending someone else's money essentially here, so there'd be these people going, well, it's like, what about win at all costs attitude and all this sort of stuff that keeps, I think there's enough evidence to show that it doesn't work, but it still comes around, and still, is still such a large part of the language in sport of, toughness and stuff. It's like, actually, I think toughness comes from resilience. It's like, we win fairly regularly. Like, we go and do races against other people to learn, and I always make sure that whatever those people have, if for us to win, is incredibly challenging, because we learn, we learn so much more from losing than we do from winning. And, we get to ask questions just like, okay, well, what am I prepared to do to change that environment, rather than going, oh, walk away. And these people are incredibly resilient on that front. It's like, oh, okay, right, what can I learn from this, and how can I move forward? The other reason, there is a sort of an underlying reason, because we're going to lose one day. And that's absolutely fine, as it should be. I hope it's an epic race, because that's what women's sports deserves. But how do you think those young women are going to feel when they lose for the first time in however many years? And if we don't create a culture, then the consequences of that are just so big that I am comfortable with being a hard ass and pushing and trying to create a network of that, we're going to fall over, but we're only going to fall so far. But that's going to happen. It's going to happen with hopefully even more people watching on the TV and stuff, and they're going to have, and I want to make sure that there is a safety net there to catch them, so that they can go through the mourning period and then move on to, yes, but wasn't I part of something epic? And I love the journey, and the lessons I learned from losing that race are now transforming me into a better human being that's going to add, I mean, right or wrong, these young women are adding so much to the human race. It's unbelievable. From just, the doctors that we have on the team, to the vets we have on the team, to the scientists who are looking at improving MRI machines, putting solar cells on satellites, to exploring the physiology of the placenta. you name it, these women are doing this just sort of extraordinary branches of science and English and law, and they're all incredibly good human beings. They'll just add.
So my final question, respecting your time to close things out here, just my final question then, and it's almost like a checking for understanding on my part. In many respects, everything that you've spoken about over the past hour, the culture that you've set up, the coaching processes within your practice that you've put in place, are in part, of course, to give your people, your competitors, the best opportunity to win. But it's also to provide a journey for them so that if they do lose, and great competitors lose, and you're in a sport where that loss it's not like week to week football, rugby, any other sport that goes week to week on a league season. A loss is you've lost it. That's it. That year is over now. That cycle is done. If they lose, they can reflect back on that journey and garner that sense of satisfaction, happiness. There's thriving, there's flourishing, those kind of aspects within your culture that they can reflect back on, and that helps them manage things going forward after a loss.
Yeah, it's the journey is the important part, shaping them into being, I want to say, more robust humans, but humans that then take those lessons and help another.
Yep.
I'm doing my job if I do that.
Paddy, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. I mean, what an incredible culture you've created, and I always tune in every year, so I've got even more reason to tune in and see how it all goes. I'm not too sure how much of a social media user you are. How can people find you and follow you?
So I have an Instagram post, which I'm busier around the boat race and pretty rubbish at most of the other times. I have a LinkedIn page as well. Again, not very high on posting, but I'm realizing that if I want to continue to engage and have these opportunities to share some of the values, and not really about increasing money, but to increase the number of people who are talking about these subjects, is what I aspire. And I'm really keen to be involved with groups to share experiences and anecdotal stuff. It'd be nice. Occasional scientist, behavioral scientist was in there as well, but yeah, learning.
So people can find you, Patrick Ryan, on LinkedIn and on Instagram. What's your handle? Do you know?
It is CUWBC Women Chief Coach. If you search Paddy Ryan, it will also come up.
Brilliant. Paddy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.